A few weeks ago, you guys might remember that I released a video for an upcoming game called Anno 117 Pax Romana, the latest installment in the Anno franchise, and I was one of the first content creators in the world to get my hands on an early preview. In that video, I had a limited time to explore as much of the game as I could within the confines of the Latium region. That, of course, meant that we were very much restricted to Roman city building, which is fun in its own right, but we know that there's going to be an upcoming campaign in the Albion region, a frontier of the Roman Empire, with a great deal of cultural friction between the natives and the Roman imperialists. Well, it just so happens I got access to another early preview of Anno, and this time I got to play in Albion, so I'm going to be showing that off for you guys today. Before we get started, though, I do want to say again a big thank you to Ubisoft for the early access. Very cool, and also thank you for sponsoring today's video. That is always much appreciated. If you guys want to learn more about Anno 117, as you watch this video, you'll be able to find a link in the description down below, and I would encourage you to click on that. Now, before we get started, a couple quick points of clarification. First off, just like last time, this was a limited time playthrough for me. I only had just over an hour to play around and find as much as I could, so there's going to be more features that I was not able to cover, but I'll get as much as I can. Secondly, understand that everything you're seeing today is very much an early preview and subject to change. Lastly, if you're finding yourself a little bit confused or lost on some of the mechanics, I really do recommend you go back and watch my previous Anno video, where I explore things in a lot of detail. I think that's going to be a big help. Okay, I think that intro was long enough. Welcome to Albion, also known as Great Britain. This is the homeland of the Celts, who find themselves under new management as the Romans push further north than they ever have been before. The lands here are wild and unfamiliar, the people filthy and, let's just say, uncivilized by Roman standards. Nonetheless, they are our new subjects, and what you're going to find very early on in this game is that you're going to have to make some choices about how you are going to govern in the name of the Empire. Do we enforce a Roman cultural hegemony upon these people and risk an uprising, or do we embrace the native traditions? But if we do, are we even truly Roman anymore? We'll have to make a choice soon, so just bear that in mind as we get started. Now, our opening moves are largely going to be the same as we had from our Latium playthrough. We still need the same types of building materials, gotta chop down those trees, gather up some lumber, etc. Though I'm sure you'll notice that all of the local buildings have a bit of a different aesthetic to them, something a little bit more appropriate for the local population. But the differences start becoming more apparent as we place down our first residences. And by the way, in Albion, the lowest class of citizens are called the waiters this time around. And our waiters have slightly different demands from our more civilized citizenry in the Latium region. No, our waiters instead would like to have some cockles, which is a type of mollusk, and eels, I kid you not. And this immediately thrusts you into one of the big differences of playing in Albion. Resources might be located on different terrain than we're used to, specifically the eels to start us off. You can only harvest them in these sort of marshlands instead, which you'll have to build over kind of as normal, but most buildings can't be built over a marsh, only specialized structures. We'll come back to that in a little bit though, don't you worry. In the meantime, our waiters still do need some public services. A market is an obvious choice, and the Bard's Hearth is a special building for them, where people can gather up and hear the great stories of old. As usual, these structures really need to be placed close to all of your residences, so a bit of urban planning is going to be in order here. Though don't forget, you do have that handy move tool to relocate some structures if you decide their placement is not so optimal later on. Finally, our waiters are going to need some basic clothing. That's going to include some reed shoes, which of course are made from reeds, which unsurprisingly will grow in the marshlands. So there's another specialized farm in that terrain. And then we'll have to get some tunics built up as well. Tunics are made from hemp, so there's a whole new type of farm. And just like with the Latium region, if we place the actual crafting stations, so like the tailor or the shoemaker, in the town itself, it does increase the local prosperity of the region, so again, more urban planning. At this point, though, we should have enough citizens that we get to advance to the next stage, and this is where we have to make a choice. How are we going to approach our governorship of Albion? If we choose to maintain our Roman heritage, then we can create a new syncretic culture, the Romano-Celts. This is intended to be a more scientifically minded faction that can mold the terrain to their will, draining those filthy swamps to make more space for larger cities and building glorious aqueducts. And the Romano-Celts are defined by the next two classes of citizenry, the Mercators and the Nobles. Alternatively, we could instead embrace the local traditions and truly become Celtic. This will place a stronger emphasis on embracing the local pagan gods and working those into our culture and adapting to the local terrain, learning to live with the land. This faction also has 2 additional levels of citizenry, and those are going to be the Smiths and the Aldermen. In addition, you may have noticed that both factions have their own unique production chains to produce some special goods. The reason that's going to be important, though, is according to the developers, once you get to the highest possible levels with your city, you will be able to mix and match both cultures at will. And of course, both will have their own individual demands. So that's going to increase the difficulty of the game pretty dramatically. That's not something I had a chance to play around with in this demo, but I can see that being very, very cool. So who am I going to go with for this playthrough? I'm pretty obviously going to go for the Romano-Celts. I think that civilizing this wild land is right up my alley. So, with that decision behind us, of course that means we now need to move on to the next round of production chains, including some new building materials. Which means we're going to need to start producing some charcoal, and we're going to need to get some brick tiles, just like the Latium region. However, the main difference is we can't get clay just anywhere, it only can be produced in the marshlands. So we'll need to set down a whole new round of warehouses and clay pits in that region. The Mercators also need their own special food. They are proper Romans after all. They need to have some wheat bread. And that means we need to grow our own wheat, mill it down, get it baked into bread, etc. Also, they would like to have some proper pork sausage. So pigsties are in our future, and some unique herbs that are only grown in the Albion region, so that's a whole nother round of farming. Also, since we are playing as the Romano-Celts, we have access to the Grammaticus for our public service needs, so we can start educating our population. If we had played as the Celts with Smiths, we would have access to something totally different, a type of religious building. Lastly, it wouldn't be a proper, let's say, Tier 2 city if I didn't start taking into account the other quality of life metrics for my citizens, and that means I need to build for health, public order, and fire safety. So more public service buildings are on the horizon. And this is where I think the game starts getting a little bit trickier because those buildings are pretty expensive to operate. So you really need to start thinking about your urban planning and really organize intelligently to get the best value possible. Otherwise, you're going to do what I did and kind of run a deficit for so long that eventually the Emperor has to bail you out. And he's not exactly pleased with you for that. So as you can see, as we pursue all of these different objectives, my town continues to grow. Larger populations, larger neighborhoods, more citizens to produce goods, and of course, consume and pay taxes. I also built a nice little governor's villa off on the side surrounded by some walls just because I think it looks pretty good. Remember, by the way, that this governor's villa is very important. If the military ever does become a major factor in your game and someone comes to invade your island, once they get to the governor's villa, they can take it over. So, yeah, have some defensive structures ready. Better yet, maybe have a military, which is kind of why I started training up a bunch of militia units, placing down a barracks, and getting some good old-fashioned Roman legions. I didn't actually test to see if the Celts have their own unique military units. It wouldn't surprise me if they did, and that would be pretty cool if so. If Ubisoft does bring me in for another one of these previews, I think the next thing I'm going to have to try is actually making use of the military to try and conquer another governor. Anno games aren't known for being very military focused, but this is Rome after all, and when in Rome, you go a-conquerin'. So I'm gonna have to give it a shot. I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, by this point we're starting to draw to a close with my 1 hour play session, so I'm frantically placing down what housing I can, expanding some services, trying to get a pretty large, reasonable town. I think I got to a population of about 500 or so before everything did shut down. And you gotta admit, it's beautiful to look at. I mean, really, this Anno game is just eye candy. And contrast this, if you'd like, with the last video, whereas Latium felt very sunny and Mediterranean, Albion is wet and sprawling with lush forests and bogs and mountains. I don't know, very different terrains, but both absolutely beautiful. I think mostly, though, I'm very glad that the developers have decided to go with different production chains for the different regions. Even if they do largely follow the exact same purpose, it does feel more appropriate to kind of live off of the natural land and not try to force the same old goods in a way that doesn't make sense. So they're really trying to go for some sort of accuracy here, and I like it. I like that a lot. You may notice, though, I haven't really shown off much beyond the main island that I'm currently playing on. There are others, and of course each of those different places have different goods. You know, I don't have ponies on this particular island, but other ones do, right? There's different production chains I can unlock. I just didn't manage to get to shipbuilding by the end of my first hour. And I still don't know, by the way, if we are going to be limited to these island style of maps like we have been in some past Anno games, or if we're going to have kind of a larger, not exactly continental, but a larger landmass to play off of. I just think that it'd be really, really cool to found London as the Romans in this game, you know? That appeals to me in a big way. And then we could use that as a central outpost to send my Roman legions forward and conquer the Celts. I mean, if you want a campaign, that seems pretty appropriate. We'll just have to wait and see as Ubisoft reveals more in the future. For now, though, that's all I get to show you today. Hopefully that sparked at least a little bit of excitement about the Albion region. We know a lot more now than we did before, and there's obviously a long way to go, so I'm looking forward to seeing how this is going to shape up. Once again, a big thank you to Ubisoft for sponsoring today's video and getting me access to this early preview. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to working with them and seeing more in the near future. Now here's the exciting news. If you'd like to try out Anno for yourself, then there will be a demo available very, very soon, running from September 2nd through September 16th. I'll include a link in the description so you can wishlist the game, follow it, and maybe just try out the demo for yourself. Otherwise, I would ask you to hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, leave a comment, subscribe, hit that notify bell for my future content, including more Anno, and I will see you guys next time.